Hello, BookTube. I went to the Brattle today, the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. For those of you who are new to the channel, and considering how long it has been since I went to the Brattle. This is the longest that I've gone without going to the Brattle when I was living in this country, for one reason or another. Probably because at first it was freezing cold, and then I had a bunch of other stuff to do. But for those of you who have joined the channel since then, the Brattle Bookshop is a used bookstore here in Boston, and it is fantastic. It's very old, but it's not staid or conservative in the way that you might think of when you think of used bookstores. Instead, it is booming. It is a briskly booming operation. It's a nice old building in the center of downtown Boston. It's 3 stories. First 2 floors are just an ordinary excellent used bookstore where it's books of all types and descriptions, all reasonably priced. And then the 3rd floor is more collectible stuff, first editions, rare stuff, something you might want to give somebody as a gift, or they might want to peruse if you are starting, a connoisseur's library of your own. And that would be good enough. That would still make it a destination where I would want to go all the time. But in addition to that, the Brattle has a sale lot outdoors. The lot next to the store, where another building would ordinarily be, is a sale lot, and it's full of $1, $3, and $5 books. And unlike a lot of used books, actually, I shouldn't say a lot of used bookstores. Most used bookstores are gone, and most of the ones that remain don't have anything like this. They might have one barrow outside with bargain stuff, but usually not. And if they do, it's junk. It's stuff where a customer brought in, 10 bags of books that they wanted to sell, and the stuff that is outside of the shop is the waterlogged, moth-eaten, ragged 10 books that they couldn't resell in the store. The Brattle's not like that at all. The outside sale lot is basically a separate store. The books are almost always in great condition, and they're not sorted in any way except by price, so you never know what you're going to find. It's a wonderful experience to go and just play out there. Just go and fill an armload of books, knowing that you're not going to be out of pocket for all that much money. Even if you stick to the $5 cards, you're not going to be out of pocket for that much money. So I went today because it was fine weather and it wasn't that cold, and I had a blast. I found a bunch of stuff, and I want to show it all to you. Because some of you, I would imagine a lot of you, don't have access to a store like the Brattle. So I'm happy to let you enjoy it through me vicariously. So the first one is a mass market murder mystery. I love mass market murder mysteries. I do. And I love this author. And I don't think I've ever seen this particular set of her works. This is Murder Most British from Bantam Books. Must be, what is this? Judging by the discoloration of the cover, it says probably 30 years ago. Oh no, even more, 1968. Okay. This is Catherine Aird. She was she specialized. She was a British mystery author. She's really, really good. I don't know why she never quite became the household name that, Josephine Tey, Ruth Rendell, Agatha Christie. I don't know why that didn't happen with her quite so much in America, but she is terrifically good. She has a recurring character, and also she's really good at small town life, small village life. Village mysteries are her forte. And this one is Henrietta Who? We have a shattered photo on the cover of someone who's obviously going to end up dead. Let me read you just a bit about these. Are so much fun. I grab them whenever I can because they're just, even rereading them, they're just so much fun. And I recommend Catherine Aird if you've never heard of her. Maybe you're looking for a new murder mystery author to just consume. And she wrote quite a few books, and she is consume worthy. This is, let's see, the townspeople would have said Larking, with its stone rectory and thatched farmhouses, was typical of 1,000 other English villages. As it happened, this was true, and everyone in Larking thought they knew everything about everyone else. In that, they found that they were mistaken, especially the morning the postman found Grace Jenkins murdered. She had lived quietly at Boundary Cottage for 21 years, but there was a great deal about Grace the townspeople didn't know. And Detective Inspector C.D. Sloane soon discovered they knew even less about her daughter, Henrietta. In fact, nobody could explain who Henrietta really was. Henrietta who? And I'm sure that if I found the rest of these, they would all look like this. but this was used as a coaster. Somebody had this set on their nightstand. I love that. So I start off with a murder mystery, and we're going to move on to a murder mystery. This was a murder mystery that was sparked by something new that I just read. I just read it and reviewed it. If I remember, I'll leave a link to my review. This is the Mammoth Book of New Sherlock Holmes Adventures, edited by Mike Ashley, with a wonderful old Victorian cover and a cameo on the front there. And this is just a collection of Sherlock Holmes pastiches. I don't think I ever read this. I was a big fan of the Mammoth Book series when it was coming out. There were, as it were, an endless number of them. And I was a big fan of them. I was a big fan of Mike Ashley, too. He does a really good job as an editor. This one came out in... it was originally published in the UK in 1997. And I think it came out in America in 2009. And I don't think I've ever read this. I've probably read some of the pastiches that are in here, but I don't think I've ever read the whole thing, and I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes pastiche stories and novels. I don't know why, because so many of them disappoint me. But I guess when one is done really right, it compensates for a lot of the bad ones. And the reason this was on my mind is because of another Sherlock Holmes pastiche that I just read and really liked. I really do recommend it, even though it has a terrible title. It's called Sherlock Holmes: A Scandal in Tokyo. And it's an English language translation of a Sherlock Holmes pastiche novel that took off in Japan when it first came out. And I don't think I have it to hand here, but I reviewed it. I really liked it. It's now out in an English language translation, and if, like me, you really like Sherlock Holmes pastiche novels and don't find them very often, and are maybe disappointed with the ones you do find, this is one. Sherlock Holmes: A Scandal in Japan is one that I really recommend. And it got me in the mood for more Sherlock Holmes pastiche novels. And one of the things I've noticed about the Brattle sale lots is that when something gets me in the mood to read something, Kismet, Brattle Karma, usually serves it up right there in front of me for $1. Usually that happens. You can't always count on it. You don't. It's a capital mistake to go to the Brattle sale lot expecting it to do what you want. That way you won't find anything. But if you go there open to the possibilities, karma will often be on your side. So here you go. I've got a nice big collection of Sherlock Holmes pastiche novels, or stories, which I will dig into today. It's also a pretty thing. In a restrained kind of way. It's a pretty thing in a way that I don't remember all the Mammoth collections being that way. but we shall see. Okay, this next one is a UK trade paperback of a book that I've already read, and I loved it. I want to read it again. It's one of this haul here is fairly evenly split between fiction and nonfiction. This is by Christos Tsiolkas, and it's Barracuda. Tsiolkas is he's an Australian author, and he wrote The Slap. He wrote a novel called The Slap that a lot of you might know. It's tremendously good. Just tremendously good. Starts off a little kernel of a plot. A perfectly normal upper middle class lawn party. A bunch of neighbors get together, and one of them slaps a child who is not their own. And everything just snowballs from there. That novel was tremendously popular. Brought the author a lot of success. I also thought it was tremendously good. Not gimmicky at all. And this is even better. I think this is even better. It's the story of a young boy, a teenage boy, who is one of those teenage boys that you maybe knew or know of, who are totally consumed by an ambition when it comes to sports. A long, long time ago in Iowa, I knew one of those boys whose ambition was tennis. Much later, I also knew someone whose ambition, like the character in this book, was swimming. But there's a bit of wish fulfillment involved in writing about that kind of boy. They are in the pantheon of teenage boys. They are the ones that come closest to godhood. But that is the strictly ancient Greek model of godhood, which is not exclusively good. It's not a compliment to say that. The boy that I knew, the tennis player that I knew, was a perfect example. He was an emptied out vessel into which had been poured only tennis. That was all. He was the closest I've ever come in my life to meeting a human thoroughbred racing horse. It was the only thing that he had ever been trained, conditioned, or imprinted to ever want or think about or do. And as you might be able to guess from that description, people like that, young men like that, teenage boys like that, tend to be functionally insane. Yes, on the one hand, they're doing something that is the pinnacle of what the schluppier high school classmates can only admire and can't even aspire to ever do. On the one hand, yes, they're doing that, but on the other hand, there's no one home. They have a focus that's so intense that it practically doubles as a psychosis. I remember one time, the boy that I knew, the tennis player that I knew, was practicing. It wasn't anything. It was just a practice in the middle of a gorgeous, endless Iowa high summer afternoon, and he flubbed a shot. That's all. That's all that it was. He'd been playing. He was practicing, and it wasn't anything. There was no crowd or anything like that. And he flubbed a shot, hurled his tennis racket to the court, and yelled out loud, "What's the matter with you? Don't you wanna win?" To himself. He said that to himself, out loud, yelling at the top of his lungs, that angry, over a missed stroke in a practice session. And that's the wish fulfillment of this novel, because the author knows perfectly well. He knows perfectly well that the boys that he's writing about are like that. But instead of having them be like that, the wish fulfillment is that he has them be deeply personal and intriguing as well. That is not the case. That is not the case. At the level in which the boy is competing in this story for swimming, typically the person has been emptied out completely. There isn't anything to them other than just raw animal instincts. Usually. Sometimes there are exceptions. And this book is about one of those exceptions. The main character in this book gets a chance to go to an elite prep school with a great swim team and a great swim coach. And he has phenomenal swimming ability. And the coach recognizes that right away. And there is a kind of a very awkward, barbed, and tentative sorting process between the new boy and the other boys on the swim team. And there's also a sexual awakening, and the writing, I think, just sings in this book. Just sings. I love it. And I had a copy of Barracuda years ago. I'm not sure that I ever hauled it on this channel. I don't think I did. I think it was before I had a channel. I had an American copy. I think it was American. It didn't look like this. The cover didn't look like this. And it didn't have that particularly solid, boxy feel that UK trade paperbacks always do. So I'm glad that I have this, because I know that I don't have the other volume. It's gone. Probably I recommended it to somebody. Probably somebody wrote to me and said, you talk on your channel sometimes about being friends with teenage boys. Do you know of any piece of fiction that captures them fairly well? There aren't many such pieces of fiction. This is one of them. Or somebody might have asked me, can you give me a non-gauzy, non-hallmarky, young gay love story? Something where I'm going to be involved, where it's not neat. And that also I'd recommend. Not even love, I would say. So I was very happy to find that. It's going to be really enjoyable to reread Barracuda. It's been a while since I read it. Talk about a joy to reread. That's this next one all over. I haven't read this author in any concerted way in probably 30 years. And I was astonished to recall that he's still alive. He seems so much like a figure from another era. This is George Steiner. No Passion Spent. This is a collection of literary essays that he did. He was a professor at Harvard and at Oxford. He was a prolific book essayist for the New Yorker and for, I think, the New York Review of Books, certainly the TLS for a long time, forever and ever, and also anywhere else. It would be an enormous volume if you tried to collect his book reviews, just his complete book reviews. The essays in this book aren't always just book reviews. In fact, not mostly. If I remember correctly, these are mostly literary essays, longer stuff, not about a particular book, not assessing any one particular artistic flight of fancy, but rather writing about authors in the more general sense. I think he's terrific. As a writer about literature, I think he's terrific. And as soon as I saw this at the Brattle, I realized that I don't have it in the other room. In the other room, there are two bookcases that are tall. They're 7 feet tall, and they're entirely devoted to my own profession, to writing, to collected book reviews and collected book essays. They're entirely devoted to that 2 whole bookcases. I go to them all the time. I stand in front of that bookcase all the time and pull down things to see, oh, what did you think about it? Because if you do a 500-page collection of literary essays and book reviews over the course of a career, George Steiner wrote about books for 40 years. If you make a book like that, almost invariably that book is going to touch on a whole bunch of different subjects, especially if you are something that George Steiner never was, but Peter Ackroyd and yours truly. If you're an Old Bailey hack, if you will basically review anything that crosses your plate, if you're Anthony Burgess, if you're Peter Ackroyd, if your unspoken reviewing ethos is, I don't have a specialty, what I have is a need for $100. If you're that kind of reviewer, then your 500-page collected reviews are God knows how big such a collection would be for Burgess. I have no idea, none whatsoever. There was a volume, but Du Blonde's Preferred Gentleman, that collected some of his book reviews, but not anywhere near all of them. And Peter Ackroyd would be the same way. How on earth? Or Clive James. How on earth could you collect all the book reviews of these people? I don't know how it would be possible. But if you do something like that, if you are a sort of an Old Bailey hack when it comes to writing about books, then your collected book is going to touch on every subject under the sun. Which means that if it's a Sunday afternoon and I'm looking forward to the week ahead of me and the things I need to review, chances are there's going to be something connected to one or more of those books in your collection yourself. And that keeps the chain going. That keeps us moving along. I intend to make a book like that myself, a series of books like that. The Year in Reviews, collecting all of my reviews from all of my venues in the previous year. I intend to do that for 2018. I know it's late in this year already, but that is still on my active docket of things to do. And then I will offer it to you for sale in the best Brattle Bookshop tradition by making the ebook $1. I just haven't done it yet, that's all, but I'm going to do it, absolutely. And this is not that. George Steiner was not that. He was much deeper. He was a deep fish. So these are much more considered, much more along the lines of Lionel Trilling, someone like that. Still enjoyable to read. Oh my, so enjoyable to read. I got this as a trade paperback, but I'll reinforce it. I'm going to have to reinforce a few of these things, so that's no problem. Then this next one is a novel for my 6,000 subscriber Q&A. Somebody asked what I thought of David Mitchell, the author David Mitchell, the author of Cloud Atlas. He's most famous for the author of Cloud Atlas. And I said that I love him. I think he's fantastic. And after I was done with that Q&A, I was thinking, I really ought to reread Bone Clocks, my favorite of his novels. And you can see the rest of this coming. I didn't have it. I don't have any David Mitchell. So I put it in the back of my mind and said, the Brattle will provide. I don't have any David Mitchell. Sooner or later, I will see the Bone Clocks at the Brattle. And I did. I found it today. I found a nice solid hardcover today with the deckled edges and the refreshing absence of falderall on the back. I say refreshing even though I myself am the author of falderall. I sometimes like a nice, dignified book like this. This is just it. Bone Clocks, I loved when I first read it. I have a feeling I'm going to love it even more this time. It's the standard spine of the story is the typical chosen one, Ingenue, who finds herself trapped between two warring mystical factions. But the warring mystical factions are the interesting thing in this book. So and it's crammed full of inventiveness. This is an author who, to use a sports analogy, leaves nothing on the field. And he's also cannily doesn't rub your nose in it, but he is cannily linking all of his books. If you pay close attention when you're reading his novels, you see that they are linked. I might be going too far to say that they take place in the same fictional enormous meta universe, but there's a DNA running through them. And so I was totally happy to find this. This is a perfect example of what I talk about with the karma of the Brattle, that you in your active reading life, you crop up a need, and then the next time you go to the Brattle, that need is satisfied. That is that I fully expect it. I've been going to the Brattle for a very, very long time, half a century or more, and I've never known that to fail. Like, for instance, use an example that didn't happen today, but it will happen. I recently decided that if it ever warmed up here in Boston, I would the patch of gardening that's right outside this window would be for flower gardening. I'd gone back and forth on whether or not I was going to garden at all, and for a long time it looked like it was never going to get warm enough. It certainly is too cold today to be out there, but today and yesterday give me the impression that warmer weather is on the way, and a lot of you said, why don't you put on your grown-up pants? Of course summer is going to come. You're acting like summer's not going to come. Of course it's going to come. Quit complaining. Okay, fine. But in addition to that, I had also been wondering what I was going to plant. Do I have enough space out there or nutrients in the soil for corn or spinach or whatnot, or potatoes? God help us. And finally I decided, no, to start, let's do flowers. That way, if I'm growing vegetables, then I've got two metrics of failure, right? I've got the first metric of failure is, do I know what I'm doing in terms of watering or growing or planting or spacing or whatever? And the second is, do the plants turn out successful in terms of being able to clean and eat them? And why bother with two metrics of failure when I'm almost certainly going to fail anyway? So my idea is I will grow flowers. So one of those metrics is removed. I'm not going to eat these flowers. I'm just going to grow them. So we'll see. I'm going to wait. A lot of you have told me it's perfectly okay to wait until Mother's Day. So I'm going to wait until Mother's Day. If the temperatures are consistently high enough, then I will plant flowers. And it's a perfect example. I made that decision probably a month ago. And I know that between now and when it's time for me to do that, a book on flower gardening for beginners will turn up at the Brattle. I know that will happen. I absolutely know that it will. I mean, look at this right here. I read a Sherlock Holmes pastiche novel, wanted more. I actually spent a bit of time walking around here looking for Sherlock Holmes pastiche stories, and then a big volume turns up. I had a question about David Mitchell. Do you like him as an author? I did, and immediately wanted to reread him as an author. Boom, there you go, David Mitchell. So anyway, now we're going to move on to biography, because I found a couple of biographies that I'll wrap this up with biographies. First one is a classic that I've had many, many times. I've actually made a present of it to many, many people, and it's this. It's Bernard Bailyn, The Ordeal of Thomas Hutchinson. And this is an absolutely revelatory work of biography from probably 60 years ago. God only knows how. There he is. That's our guy. That's Thomas Hutchinson. This is probably from the 60s, maybe the early 70s. When was this published? 1974. Okay, 1974. So that's a long time ago. This is incredibly good. As the title will indicate, this is about the last royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, who was, in other words, the governor of Massachusetts during the Revolution, when the Revolution erupted, and is shorthanded, therefore, in American history as a bad guy. And Bernard Bailyn starts off right away by pointing out that he was an American. Many generations of his family had lived here. He was not, because he was royal governor, doesn't mean that he came over on a ship from London and took over the job saying, where is Massachusetts Bay again? No. He was an American, every much the same as the people that revolted against the British Crown, and hence the title of this book. And it is just amazing. As soon as I saw it at the Brattle, I realized that I am in between copies. Usually I give copies of this away to people, and I grabbed it right away, especially since it's a really nice hardcover. It'll take a bit of reinforcing, like most of these things, but then it's a keeper. I mean, the Ordeal of Thomas Hutchinson is a keeper. It is a masterwork of American biography, so it'll go right on the biography shelves that we are touring. And then this next one, the last thing I want to end with, this was the find of the day. And I must admit, I didn't see it at first. An old friend of mine who was in the sale lot with me mentioned it and led me to it. And I just grabbed it. I hope that I didn't grab it from him. I don't think he would have been all that interested in simply buying it on his own. But I lost consciousness for a moment, so I may have. This is by Stephen Gwynn. This is from, I don't even know, 100 years ago. This is a 2-volume, The Letters and Friendships of Sir Cecil Spring Rice, a record. 2 volumes. We've got a gap right there. I'm going to fix these up, though, because these dust jackets need help, or they're not going to survive reading. And I will fix that when I fix the rest of it. I'm thinking that I'm certain that I have pictures of Cecil Spring Rice here, and I'm thinking that a picture here and a picture on the second volume might be nice, especially since I am never going to get rid of these. These are going to be so amazing to read. Let me see if it actually says when this came out. It was probably 100 years ago, almost 100 years, 1929. And there is Cecil Spring Rice as a young man. And that, I think that picture is when he was in his 30s, and he was even fresher faced when he was in his 20s. And he was a diplomat. Pretty much his whole life, he was a diplomat. And went everywhere. He was part of the legation in Russia, famously in Japan, in Tehran. He actually spoke, read, and wrote in Persian. And was one really, really bright young man, really, really involved, caused him to advance in the diplomatic service at a much faster rate than would otherwise have been true. And eventually he achieved his life's goal of being the ambassador from the UK, from Britain to Washington. And there was partly that was his life goal because he was close friends with Theodore Roosevelt. But he also became close friends with William Howard Taft, and was everywhere in the Washington of the day. It was the storm clouds were gathering, and the task of the end of his life was to get America into World War I, to end American neutrality, to bring the country around. But the title of these two volumes, if you can make this out here, The Letters and Friendships of Cecil Spring Rice, that is well chosen. That title is well chosen because as great a diplomat as he was, and he was really good, but he was really good as a diplomat mainly because his main talent in life was friendship. He was just one of those people, a beaming white face and direct, clear, non-fake eyes. Was one of those people you wanted his take on something that happened. Even if he didn't happen to be a legation to your country at the time, you still wanted his take on it because you knew that he'd have a take and you knew that it would be really good. Maybe not yours, but really good. He was one of those people. He wanted him to be involved if there was trouble. If there was something that communication could help to solve, then you wanted him to be involved. In American fiction, in American TV fiction, those of you who are familiar with the great TV show The West Wing, he would be a kind of non-over-the-top, non-comedic version of Lord John Marbury, who in The West Wing is appointed ambassador to Washington. But even when he's not acting in his ambassadorial capacity, the Bartlett administration still likes to call him in on international questions just to get his take on things. He is done in a very absurdist way, but if you take that element away, that's Cecil Spring Rice. That's who he was to two presidents, but actually more than two presidents. He was close friends with Roosevelt. They were like brothers. He was the best man at Roosevelt's wedding. Roosevelt was a godfather to his children, I think. He and Roosevelt saw the world the same way and were very close friends. But he was also close friends with Taft, with William Howard Taft. But he also, now that I think about it, he also knew, worked with, and consulted with other presidents. So, and these two volumes are everything. These two volumes are, I am sure, pretty much the only thing that's ever been written about him. I doubt he'll ever get a biography. But he knew everybody. He was close school friends with, for instance, Gray of Faladon, who has come up on this channel in tedious biographical digressions, just like this one. And this is a perfect example of the kind of thing that you get at the Brattle, that shows up at the Brattle. And this was outside. These were on the bargain carts. Whereas maybe a used bookstore in, I don't even know, Florida or something like that. Maybe a used bookstore that doesn't see the enormous traffic of used books that the Brattle does might see something like this and think either I don't want it because I don't have any audience for it, or I don't quite know what it is, but it looks really old, so I'm going to price it at $35 for the set. And that is not the case at the Brattle. That never happens at the Brattle. The Brattle, you can go out into the sale lots and find these 100-year-old memoirs and biographies every day. and it's a feast for someone like me. So there you go. This is such a pleasure to have these. It's going to be such a pleasure to re-enter the world of Spring Rice and his mind. He wrote 10 letters a day at least, constantly firing off letters and getting as many in return. So I'm going to fix these up. These volumes will not sustain a reading in their current condition. The dust jackets, I mean. I'll fix up the dust jackets, and then I think I'll just indulge myself. So that was my Brattle trip today. It was the Letters and Friendships of Cecil Spring Rice. Then we have the Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. We have the Ordeal of Thomas Hutchinson, a great work of American biography, especially the Revolutionary era. Then we have, let's see here, what else do we have? The Mammoth Book of New Sherlock Holmes Stories. No Passion Spent by George Steiner, which is a collection of literary essays of his. Barracuda by Christos Tsiolkas. And Henrietta Who by Catherine Aird, an author I highly recommend if you're in the mood for classic era British mysteries. Then she might be someone you haven't heard of, and if you haven't, you're gonna love her. She's wonderful. You just pop them right down. And that's it. That was my Brattle trip for today. I wrote about any of these things in the past. I will leave links down below, but I can't remember off the top of my head if I've ever written about any of these people. But I'll wrap this up for now. This has gone on way too long, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.